Like, what do you think from experience are the merits and demerits of raising Nigerian kids in Canada?
I don't believe in this notion that, oh, it's hard to raise kids abroad, because here there's hardly any house helps. There's hardly any domestic staff, right? So it's either the parents are doing the work or you find a way, all of you in the house do the work. I've seen kids in Nigeria at 15, 14, they can't do anything. Many of these children are so rude because they have all the domestic staff.
What does it mean the sole reason for relocation is for the children? What is your view on that take?
It makes sense for people to say, I'm doing this because of my kid. We gave up a lot to come to Canada. We want to leave behind a legacy that our children can look back and say, my dad did this.
Steps have you been able to take, or are you taking to ensure that our Nigerian values and Nigerian culture is still maintained, especially living abroad or living in Canada?
It's quite tough, imbibing those values in those kids. So a typical example is this. If my daughter sees you now, I don't expect her to call you by name, to say Shegun.
I think we're resonating on the same frequency, but Lola disagrees vehemently.
When we're talking about respect, for example, I dare to ask you, are many Nigerians respectful? We pretend to be respectful. If you're a respectful person, it's going to be easy for your kids to pick things up from you. Remember, kids are watching. Kids learn by watching more than you telling them to do. Of course, my kids know, like, when they see somebody who is like our skin, they know that the right thing to greet is good morning, sir, good morning, ma. But they also know that I can't tell them to go greet a Caucasian, good morning, ma, before you even say good morning, ma. The Caucasian is not even hearing. Some of those kids are very timid as black-skinned because they are confused. If you don't raise kids who know their identity, then they just fall for anything. Many Nigerians just shout and shout. You shout respect. Are you respecting you have a spouse in your house? Do you respect it? I tell people, go volunteer in your kids' school. Many times, take days off from work. And this is my charge to every African abroad. All this year, I'm working 1 million hours. I'm looking for money. Money can never be enough. Even Elon Musk is still looking for more money. My dad used to cook. My dad used to sweep. My dad used to clean. All those soldiers who were like other ranks, we call them like, well,
I mean, it's safe to say that we all grew up in Nigeria. And I think everybody grew up in Nigeria, born in Nigeria and grew up in Nigeria. And it's also safe to say that our own childhood experiences or how we grew up is very different from how our kids are growing up today in 2024. What do you think from your experience, Lola? What do you think from your experience are the merits and demerits of raising Nigerian kids in Canada or African kids generally? What are the advantages or disadvantages from your own experience?
Okay. So for me, I think, like I tell people, I'm a Christian, first of all, but people think I can be very controversial because they're like, oh, you're not like, I'm not a fanatic. I'm a Christian who has a relationship with God. So I use my brain. I'm not somebody who just follows the tides. Why I'm saying that is one of the views I have myself, for example, is that you can thrive anywhere, you can live anywhere, you can raise kids anywhere. Okay? If I'm thriving in Lagos, I would thrive in any place I find myself if I have the values and I know what I need to do. I lived in Lagos, for example. I grew up mostly in the north, and then Abuja, and then Lagos. I was hardworking. I was doing well. I was not like anything bad in Lagos if I left Canada. And the same hard work I put in here, right? So that's why I'm giving a preamble of what I'm going to say. So I also believe that you can raise great kids abroad. You can raise great kids in Nigeria. You can raise bad kids abroad. You can raise bad kids in Nigeria. We've seen it all, right? I've seen it all. I went to a boarding all-girls school, for example, and you had the bad, the good, and the ugly. And I think very early in life, I already knew that there was good and bad, right? So I don't believe in this notion that, oh, it's hard to raise kids abroad. What are the systems you have in place now? Bringing it back here to your topic, which is what are the pros and cons, right? For me, I think raising kids abroad, there's I think there are better systems, right? Easily accessible to everybody. When I say better systems, easily accessible to everybody, there's a level playing ground here. Compared to back home, like to access certain levels of certain things, your kids had to go to certain kinds of schools, right? It's not like everybody will go to the same school and have the same access to everything. I think when the school I went to, we're very lucky. I went to a military girls' school. So I went to Air Force Girls in Jos. So we had everybody in that school, like the rich, the middle class, the super rich, the, like everybody, but there was no class. However, I don't think we have those kind of things anymore in Nigeria, where you see a school where there's maybe, I'm telling you that we had president's kids there, we had governor's kids, we had senators' kids, we also had officers' kids, we also had other ranks kids. When I say other ranks, like corporal, sergeant, we had officers like myself whose parents were in the military and they were senior officers. We had, do you understand? Like we had everybody. We don't have that now. I don't think right now in Nigeria, maybe some federal schools, but I don't think there are any schools where you would see this range of people, right? So right now, as at 2025, if you wanted your kids to have access to certain things, they had to be in certain kinds of schools in where you live at least, right? But abroad, I think everybody goes to the same kinds of schools, right? A few people go to private schools. Private schools are in Canada, but they're not as in vogue like the US. So I'm talking about Canada now when I'm talking here, right? Most people will go to at least either Catholic schools or public schools, or maybe a few like specialized schools here in Canada. So I feel like they have access to the same kinds of things. They have access to equipment, they have access to resources, they have access to everybody being in the same kinds of school, right? So in your neighborhood, there'll be all sorts of people you mix up with the same set of people. So in that neighborhood, of course, you can have the super rich, you can have like the middle class, you can have like, do you understand? So I feel like they're exposed to all these kind of things. Now, the pros of raising kids in Nigeria, I feel like, honestly, just maybe, honestly, I don't know if I have too many pros. One of my kids started school in Nigeria, right? And like I said, I know I had to pay certain amounts of money for them to access the kind of schools they went to, right? I would rather say cons. I think the cons for me in Nigeria is like the fact that there's already classism from very early in life. And there's already a lot of segregation, whether I would like it or not, or whether I would like to say it or not. Now, I'm not saying that will determine what happens to the kids in future, but it's already very visible from very early, right? Everybody is in certain kinds of schools. Some people are in one, you understand what I'm trying to say, right? That's for the cons in Nigeria. The pros too, maybe like they have family, more family. Let me look for that pros. Like they have grandparents, they have maybe cousins, they have, all of that around that they can see easily as compared to abroad. The cons for me abroad, maybe I think, is how certain parents will raise the kids here. And that thing I'm finding is that many of us, because we lacked certain things growing up, we want to live our lives through these children, right? And I'm beginning to see people forgetting what parenting is about, and rather are trying to live their lives through their kids, right? So I couldn't access all this luxury when I was younger. Then my kids must access all these luxuries. I'm not saying they're bad, don't get me wrong, but I have a problem with kids who are like 10, 11, 12, already like, that mindset, like, if I'm not well luxury, do you understand? Like kids who are very entitled, I think that's the word. And then you see many kids are becoming very entitled very early, right? I was saying I don't like entitled people. I can't stand entitled people. I don't think anybody owes anybody anything. And which is why I tell people when people do things for me, I'm very grateful, for example, like, because I don't expect anything from anybody. Nobody owes you anything. But I'm beginning to see a lot of these kids abroad being very entitled very early in life, right? And you can't blame some of them because it's what their parents are doing, right? You must realize that children come as tabula rasa. Tabula rasa means clean slate. Whatever you train these children to be is what they're going to be. So if parents, for example, who couldn't access luxury early in life are all about, okay, now I've arrived. It must be luxury this, luxury that. And then it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, of course, who doesn't want good things? But when you now start to raise kids who are beginning to become entitled to things like that, you are raising kids that, oh, because I did all the house chores when I was younger, my kids will not do any house chores. So you see children at 10 don't even know how to do anything, right? And this happens not only abroad. Again, Shagun, it happens. I'm talking about our generations generally, even in Nigeria, right? I even think, if you ask me, I think kids abroad to an extent are more independent than kids in Nigeria, because here there's hardly any house helps. There's hardly any domestic staff, right? So it's either the parents are doing the work, or you find a way, all of you in the house do the work. I've seen kids in Nigeria at 15, 14, they can't do anything because they have all the domestic staff, right? So you're not even teaching these children like how to do chores early in life. Many of these children are so rude, right? Because their parents have arrived now, they don't have respect for anybody. These kids are picking things up. So I think it can happen anywhere, but these are some of the cons I'm seeing here.
Thanks, Ola. We'll get back to you. Thank you for the mix. You mixed everything, and you didn't serve us pros and cons independently. You mixed everything together. So as you're putting pros for Nigeria, you put cons for Canada. You put pros for Nigeria, put cons for Nigeria, and I really appreciate that. You talked about entitlement, and I would like to ask Emeka, following up with you said many parents want to live their lives in their children, something like that. Now, the question I have a view on this, but it's a question that I hear a lot from many Nigerians or Africans when they relocate, is that I'm doing this for my children. I really want to understand, what does it mean if the sole reason for relocation, or the major 90% reason for relocation from Nigeria to any other country, including Canada, is for the children? What is your view on that take?
With respect to your question, I can say that most people, that might include me, may or may not include me, or some people say, oh, I moved abroad for my kids, because they don't really have a great answer as to why they moved abroad, or they want to sound very selfless. And I tell people that for me, when I came abroad, I didn't have children. So I couldn't have said I moved for my kids. I had to find a good reason. I moved because I wanted opportunities. I have a 2-year-old now, and most of the things I talk about are centered around her. It makes sense for people to say, I'm doing this because of my kid, because at the end of the day, most of us are in midlife. We've lived half of our lives, whether we like it or not. And we want to leave behind a legacy that our children can look back and say, my dad did this. So I think that's the short form of that answer, because living in Canada now, you tend to see things from the perspective of how it will be detrimental or beneficial to your children, and not necessarily you. We gave up a lot to come to Canada. Believe me, you don't realize this until you make that leap. Until you start living in Canada, you don't realize what you give up. There's the fact that I was speaking to my mother the other day, and I said to her, you realize that it's possible I may never see you again. I said the same to, and you know, when you say this to people, they're like, oh no, you can't say that. I said, other than the fact that I may die tomorrow, there's also the added fact that I may not even be able to afford to come back to Nigeria or to pay for your flight ticket to bring you here. My brother has children who I have not seen, I have not touched. These things affect you and many people in very different ways. So right now, the best that we can do is to hold our children close and make sure that we live life in a way that they can grow up tomorrow and not have the scars of the lives that we've lived, and not have the, what is it called? Post-traumatic scars of the pains that we bear today. That's what most of us are doing. Anyone who has children in Canada will have this concern. And that's the short form of the answer. Thank you.
Well, interesting. as usual, saying it as it is. Uncle Pizza, you just say like that. You know, this is I may not see you again, and I'm like, oh my goodness,
it's the truth.
Yeah. You know, when you talked about giving up many things, you know, it's so true. When even in Canada, you find out that, like you rightly said, you said you had met Busui you only met Busui once, face to face.
Yeah. And even Lola, I don't think I've seen Lola 5 times since we met, but we chat every day.
Exactly. So I can imagine how these things would have happened 15, 20 years ago, before WhatsApp, internet, video calls, and all that. I can imagine the former or the old immigrants, the African immigrants of the 60s and 70s. How did they maintain this community? How did they maintain this, having this social thing, even if they're unable to see physically? That's another topic, a topic for another day. Busui, thank you. So I have a question for you. And this question I have for you, I would also like to hear the same question I have for everybody. And we know we are Nigerians, we're Africans. We have African values. We have Nigerian values. What would you say, or what are the steps that you have taken to ensure that our Nigerian values are maintained in your kids? Because it's easier, in my opinion, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's easier to maintain African values when you are in Africa or in Nigeria than to maintain it in Canada. I see Lola shaking her head. I'm excited, waiting to hear a point of view. I cannot wait. So let's start with you, Busui. Then after Busui, we go to Lola. Please go ahead.
Oh, that's a tough one. You know, a lot of times when we say African values or Nigerian values, one of the major things I would say is our values and respect. And respect in terms of how do you talk to people, how do you communicate with people of your age, people older than you, even people younger than you, people not in the same, should I say, social standing with you. How do you relate to them? How do you communicate with them? And we hold, in our culture in Nigeria, we hold respect, very high and everything. It's quite tough, imbibing those values in the kids, especially when you're here, and a lot of times they have to go to school, they have to mix, with other kids who are from other backgrounds, who are from other places, who don't necessarily share that same culture as you guys do. So a typical example is this: if my daughter sees you now, I don't expect her to call you by name, to say Shegun. I expect her to either say Uncle Shegun, or even probably maybe say Mr. Shegun. But you can imagine explaining to that same kid who has to go to school and who has to address someone much older than them by their name, because that's the culture here. They have to tell them that, look, when you see me, call me Nicholas. I am Nicholas. It's not necessary to use Mr. Nicholas. You can use it, but you're probably, and that same kid now comes home and Omolola visits my house, and I'm saying, and she says Omolola, and I'm like scolding the kid to say, how dare you say that? She's older than you, and you can see that she has kids. You can't call her by name. You have to, put some respect in it. So you have to be very, very cautious in trying to ensure that we are imbibing some of our cultures in them, to say that, look, I understand when you're in school, yes, this is in formal language. When you're in school, you've been told to probably call everybody by name, and that's the usual routine. But where we are from, African culture, you just have to try to make that distinction, especially when you're at home here, to ensure that you don't use names on other people. Then again, respect is not just about calling people by names, or calling people by auntie or uncle or whatever it is. Also, the way you talk to people, the way you treat people. Ensure that, look, these kids, it's hard, but try to ensure that, look, you will see traits once in a while in them when when they talk to people, when they're in public, you say something, and the response they're giving you, you see certain traits where when the kid is trying to, kind of divert and go the other way, and just to ensure that look, you're covering some of those traits immediately and some of those things, how they talk to even some of their mates. Because sometimes you have your kids, you have maybe one of their friends, their neighbors come to the house. Sometimes you might want to, play by night, but sometimes you just want to listen to their interactions. What are the interactions like? What do they discuss? What do they argue about? Because kids, they will probably argue about a toy, a show on TV they are watching, and you just ensure that look, whenever that happens, you try to correct them in certain things to say, look, you were wrong on this, and you're right on this. Yes, this is how you should have handled this. This is how you should have handled that. The way you spoke to this person or the tone you used to speak to this person was wrong. You don't speak to people like that. You don't do that because it's also part of respect, the way you speak to people, the tone you use, the mannerisms and everything. So it's quite tough over here because another thing here is that, yes, you don't want to raise timid kids. You want your kids to be expressive, to be able to speak their minds, to be able to hold their own even when you're not there. But you also do not want to raise what adjective can I use to qualify this? You also do not want to raise kids that are not over expressive, but take it way above the top, always high pitched, always always too assertive. There's a level there's a level to it. I know it's tough, especially for kids, how to balance it, but you also have to just ensure that you try to keep them in moderation, and you try to moderate everything regarding them.
Thanks. I think we're resonating on the same frequency, but Lola disagrees vehemently. so I can't wait. I can't wait to hear your own point of view. Let me just repeat the question. What steps? Okay, I think I had it, and if you, but the question is, what steps have you been able to take, or are you taking to ensure that our Nigerian values and Nigerian culture is still maintained, especially living abroad or living in Canada? And I say this because I know that, and I don't know particularly for Canada, because I know that in the US, for instance, there's lots of freedom that they give to kids, freedom to think, freedom to decide even before they get to the age of 18 and all that. So please, Lola, please go ahead, shoot.
I know I was not vehemently disagreeing. I think I'm going to boil down this back to, in my opinion, whoever you are, I don't think the location matters. Who you are, I think, is key to how you go through life. When you're talking about like how do you instill discipline in kids, whether abroad or Nigeria, when we came here, I think my kids were 5 and 1, and they're going to be 11 and 7 very shortly in a few weeks. I don't think how I'm raising my kids here is different from how we're raising them in Nigeria. When we're talking about respect, for example, I dare to ask you, are many Nigerians respectful? Or do we think we're respectful? Or do we pretend to be respectful? You know why I say this? If you're a respectful person, it's going to be easy for your kids to pick things up from you. Remember, kids are watching. Kids learn by watching more than you telling them to do.
True.
The other day I was in a group and I was saying, I worry about, and I've said it so many times, I worry about many of the kids Nigerians are raising abroad. And without feeling self-righteous or judicious or whatever, many people are not even self-aware. Many people don't even know their identity. Many people are just coasting through life. So you're saying one thing, you're saying something, you're doing something totally different. In my own case, for example, I grew up in a family where my dad was big on respect, but very liberal. So even back home in Nigeria, after university, I lived alone as a single lady. Things that would not happen in Nigeria. Because once you're done with university, when you get your first job, my dad will help you pay your first rent, and you choose one like appliance for him to buy for you. I remember he bought me my generator, if I remember clearly, and every other thing in my house, I started to put in after I started working with Access Bank. I worked with Access Bank where we're calling each other by first names. Does that now make me rude to the people I'm working with? Some of my bosses who are my friends till to date are from Access Bank. So even though I was calling them Emeka, calling them Shegun, calling them Busui, I respected them, right? But it was a first name basis. Now bring it back here. It's the same thing we're teaching our kids, right? Of course, my kids know that when they see somebody who is like our skin, they know that the right thing to greet is good morning, sir, good morning, ma. But they also know that I can't tell them to go greet a Caucasian, good morning, ma, before you even say good morning, ma. The Caucasian is not even hearing you. And then the next thing they say, you don't greet. Hi, morning is how you greet a Caucasian. So you need to make them understand certain things. But I've seen many people in the place of trying to build respect. You see I volunteer a lot in my kids' school. Some of those kids are very timid as black-skinned because they are confused. They are confused. I tell people, raise kids who know their identity. If you don't raise kids who know their identity, then they just fall for anything, right? So let them know the difference. I'm not saying be friendly to every black person they know because of security reasons. But when you see a black person, don't say hi, because that is how we interpret respect. Morning, sir. Good morning, ma. Not even uncle or auntie. Not everybody say uncle and auntie. No. They know a few of our friends that they can call uncle and auntie. Yeah, because you now make these children call everybody uncle and auntie, and then abuse starts. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? You need to know how to set boundaries. Now, when they go to school, you can't greet a Caucasian like I said, good morning, ma. How? Even at work, before you say good morning, they're not even hearing you because they are mumbling. So morning, hi, how are you? And you move on, right? So for me, I think, honestly, it's the same way we're raising our kids. So here, the same discipline, we have it here. I remember just yesterday, I was Zooming with one of my colleagues. He's of Asian descent. And I've told them this story. I tell them, my kids don't use tech, for example, during the week. Like when I mean tech, there's no iPads, there's no TV. And so the guy was talking to me. He has a small baby, like 6 months. And he was like, how did you achieve that? Like, do you hide the iPads? I'm like, why should I hide the iPads in the house? The iPads are upstairs where they're charging. He's like, they don't go to touch it. I'm like, why should they touch it? There's no iPad to be used during the week. Why? He's like, oh, you don't have to hide it. I'm like, no, it's just by the TV upstairs. And he's like, you don't touch it. Why would they touch it? There are rules and regulations. And we don't even, after he went off the call, I was not talking to my husband. I was like, wait, we haven't even thought about this. I was like, wait, so there's a tendency that they will go touch the iPad. Like, no, right? And again, because we also do what we practice. Do you understand? We don't game. We're gamers in my house. Like we're big gamers, for example. Myself and my husband don't game during the week. So we're setting the example. My kids see how I treat people. I treat people with respect. If I see a Nigerian, if I see Bushi's parent tomorrow, I will kneel down on the ground. I think I'm still one of the few Nigerian ladies who still kneel down anywhere on the road. I dare tell you. Yeah, my kids might not do it, but that's how I've always greeted from Nigeria. Do you understand? If I see Emeka's mother, I will kneel down and greet her, right? Now, do I expect my kids to... So when they see me doing that, they're really respectful to people. Am I making sense to you? But they know their identity. Same way I tell people, we don't go to any religious schools. I'm not one of those people. But everybody knows my kids are Christians. Like they know, they tell you early on, right? But they have a lot of friends. So what we raise them is that who know who you are, but accept everybody for who they are. However, this is my identity. This is my values. Respect is one of it. Being like I know who God is one of it. Everybody might not believe in God, but I believe in God, for example, right? But I also dare tell you that my kids are one of like the friendliest people in school. Like everybody wants to be their friend. Does it mean they are people pleasers? No. They're also the same people like if you are not getting yourself together, they move on. Like they know, even the teachers say it. So what I'm trying to say is we have to help these kids. You have to help them grow, knowing their identity, and then you have to let them know, okay, these are the values we have in this family, and you have to live the values. Many Nigerians just shout and shout, you shout respect, and you respecting you have a spouse in your house. Do you respect each other? Do you understand? Even the way you talk to each other, do you respect each other? The kids are picking up on it. Right? So, and that's why I was saying I was not vehemently against it, but I'm just like, most times I think we like to talk a lot. and we don't do actions. I've gone to school, like I told you, I volunteer a lot in my kids' schools, and I see how rude some children are. And can I tell you, I know some of their parents, and I know how rude the parents are. So yes, I know. So it doesn't shock me. There was one day one of these girls was so rude to me. Then I asked her questions, and she was like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry. And I was like, you don't do that to me anymore. If you do that to your parents, that's fine. You don't do that with me. Right? And that person's parent fought. So I didn't even bother telling, because there are some people I will have approached, like, but this kind of person, you go approach them, I know how they're going to react. Do you understand? So people are picking up these things. Your children are picking them up. You think it's nothing? They're picking them up. You are just driven by money as a man, or for example, all is only money. Once I throw money at everything is okay. These children are picking it up. I tell people, go volunteer in your kids' school many times. Take days off from work. And this is my charge to every African abroad. Take days, all this year I'm working 1 million hours, I'm looking for money. Money can never be enough. Even Elon Musk is still looking for more money. I'm just telling you, take days off, observe, walk with your kids to school, follow them to the school bus. Do you understand? Volunteer in school, you will see certain things. So that's my own take. I'm sorry, I might have scattered everything. What? Sorry.
No, no. Lola, when you started, I think you were still warming up, and you are cruising right now, and I'm enjoying it. I had to mute. If I did not mute, I'll probably have distorted this video, because there are lots of and many people watching have complained that I do a lot of So I was just doing and everything was going. I was writing everything, and I was like, wow. Now, before I move on, I need to digest what you have just said, because you've packed so many things inside of this. The first thing is, okay, Busi, sorry, just give me a second. So the first thing is, I like how you talked about differentiating, how you've been able to instill this kind of values in your kids, where they're able to know the difference between Africans and non-Africans, Caucasians and Black people. And that is very, very good. In fact, your kids will be well-rounded kids who can associate in any gathering. They know how to turn on that switch and comport depending on what the environment allows or enables, and that is important. The second thing you mentioned is this concept of respect. Like Busi said earlier, it is a normal thing in our African culture and Nigerian culture, where you think because you put a sir or you call somebody Mr., that is the definition of respect. Somebody can say, oh, you are, can insult somebody and put a sir afterward. Does that make the insult less potent? The answer is no. So respect is also what you get. You also mentioned that children watch. They watch what you do. They watch how you behave. And in fact, when they record that, they go out and then they display what they see at home. The home is the first, in my opinion, the home is the very first school that a child learns from. And many parents, unfortunately, think that they can throw money and take their kids to expensive schools to get those core values. And you can't do that. You can't push the responsibility of your children to strangers who don't know your kids better than you. The third thing you talked about is confidence. It's it's something that you would notice that many of growing up, we're told not to look an elder in the eye when we're talking. Look down. There's no confidence, you see, and you're afraid. You can't say and express yourself. And I'm happy that younger parents in Nigeria, back home in Nigeria, are changing that and trying to allow their kids to be expressive, to say what's on their mind. Don't quiet them and say, oh, your point of view doesn't make sense because you are 6. No, they have a point of view, and that's how they build it. So you packed a lot that I probably forgotten. Maybe when I'm watching this video again, I'm taking more notes and jotting. So before we go to, thank you so much, Allah, for that contribution. Before we go to Mika Bushi, I see you raised your hand. You have something you want to add to that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. I made from Omala is, for example, there's a difference when you're raising a toddler, someone who is 5 years or 6 years old. Their understanding, and their interactions are still quite different. But and it's even good you have an 11-year-old when you're raising a teenager, because a lot of times when they're getting into that teenage years, 11, 12, and they're almost getting to 13 when they get to the teenage years, what in terms of respect our African culture and a lot of times we say a lot of things like the kids see what we do, and but how about external influences when they start making friends, they start mixing with friends and that interaction, and they try to start getting influence, peer pressure and everything. How do you try to curb some of those things? How do you control? Yes, you don't want your kids, you don't want a timid kid where you're locking the kid inside the house and say you're not going out. Parents allowed us to express ourselves. They allowed us go out. You take permission. You tell them where you're going to. They know who your friend is. They bring that friend home. Let me see who your friend. Let your friend come visit. And they wanted to use that opportunity, to get to know who you are mixing with and everything. How do we over here in Canada? How do we also curb that in terms of some of those external influences, that especially the negative ones?
Okay, good question.
Good question.
Great question. Not even good question. Great question. I will turn it back. I keep saying that again. Maybe the way I grew up, right? And don't forget, for example, I grew up. My dad was a senior military officer, just to backtail. And when I'm talking about like even respect, we saw my dad do everything as a general. Like my dad was a senior officer. My dad used to sweep. We had oddlies all over my house. When I mean oddlies, we had soldiers who were supposed to drive, cook, clean. My dad used to cook. My dad used to sweep. My dad used to clean. All those soldiers who were like other ranks, we called them like, well, do you understand? Like you can't call them by name. And you could see that we're totally different from some other officers' kids who had no respect for these people. But for example, you see my dad, right? I remember the day my dad's driver's wife died. He was a Muslim. My dad's driver, I can't remember what happened. My dad had to go stand in as a husband for them to bury her. He drove himself all the way. So we saw all these things growing up, right? Now, I'm just giving you an example. Now, coming back in Nigeria, and it's the same. I tell people I use the model my dad used a lot, right? He knew my friends. He didn't shade us. He didn't hide us. So he was teaching us life, like these are the values you have to have, these are the things. So when we even went outside, we knew good and bad. See, when I was in university, I went to Covenant University, right? I remember people used to tell me, like, I had all sorts of friends in Covenant University. Don't forget, again, I'm when you're looking for tongue-speaking, Holy Ghost-speaking Christian. However, people will be like, what are you doing with this kind of person? Sometimes, right? Like, different people came around me. I had the good, the bad, the ugly, right? But it never affected me. Like, I'm still who I was 20 years ago. I'm only better. I'm still the Christian. Nothing has phased. Like, nobody can influence me, is what I'm trying to tell you. I've never understood peer pressure. I remember one time, Busui, my dad used to tell me something when I was growing up as a teenager. He used to say, the mindset you have, you're very lucky. Not many people have it. But now I look back, and I'm glad I was able to stand in this world for myself. I'm raising my kids like that. Now you're asking me about influence. Busu, you remember, again, I'm a Christian, so I'll make reference to this. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should grow. When he is old, he will not depart from it. People take things for granted. If you train up your child, they know their identity. Where we have problems is where people don't know their identity. People fall for anything. And even as adults, you still see it happening. Like you don't even know what you stand for. So this one drags you here, you go. This one drags you up, you come. This one come back here, you come back. Tomorrow you go back here. These children should know who they are. Who are you? What are your values? For example, in this house, we're very self-aware. We say regulate yourself. So we're not against anger in my house. Anger is a healthy emotion. You can get angry, but what do you do while you're angry? Some people teach their children not to get angry. So they grew up thinking anger is a bad thing. As parents, I remember the other day I was telling my husband, like, oh, there was a way my son, he's becoming preteen now, the hormones are coming in, testosterone and all that. And he was angry and showed his, like, normally my son is calm. My daughter is the Daboski one. She's the younger one. And I was like, wow, this guy is becoming a man now. Like, you could see how he was, do you understand? Like, he expressed his anger, and we were like, okay, I think we even apologized myself. I can't remember what we did. And we're like, sorry, that's not what we meant. Do you understand? And then, he was like, yeah, I didn't like what his sister was doing, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, long story short. So they need to know who they are. Now, back to friends, we see. we also take things for granted. My son's friends in school, I don't think most of his friends are from different nationalities who are second generation immigrants. So he has, his best friend was from South Korea. That one just moved. He has friends whose parents, like their own parents are from like Turkey, Asia, Caucasians, right? So he has a mix. And I know these boys, right? I know their parents. How many people know their friends, their children's friends? This is what I'm telling you. We're just working 10 hours, 50 hours, 1 million hours. Do you know your friends, your kids' friends? Do you even watch them in school? Like when I say volunteer, do you even know their parents? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So we leave a lot of things lax, and then later you say somebody is being influenced because you don't even know when something has gone wrong. For example, there's a girl like my son has as a friend, right, in school. And one of the days I was volunteering and I saw some things she did, right? And I was like, so I asked questions in the class. And a couple of them were like, she's a bit meany, and you know that kind of girl that is a bit mean. And both the boys and girls, so it was not a one-sided view, right? So she's not his friend, but she sits next to him. Do you understand? Like she's not even his. You can't count him amongst the 5 or 6 friends he rolls with on a daily basis, right? So when he was like, yeah, she sits next to me, so she's my friend. I was like, but yeah, she can be mean, right? Is that right? He was like, no, yeah, we try to tell her all the time, like she shouldn't be this mean. So I warned him about it. I was like, why do you think it's not good to relate with mean people and not be mean? He understood, right? So I'm like, okay, next time things like this are happening, she was like, of course, we let the teacher know. In that situation, they won't let the supervisor know. Am I making sense to you? So he knows. I already know like that person is somebody I should put eyes for, because I know the kind of person she is as they're going into high school, right? But his main 5 friends, I know them, they're level-headed people. If anything changes in grade 8, or, do you understand? I would know like, oh, we need to take note of it. But at least I even know the basis of the people. Saying now, my daughter is in grade 1, I'm beginning to understand the friends she has. There are some people I was like, but she's still finding her footing. Do you understand? She's still finding her footing till we get to where we're going to. Toddlers, how many things can you teach them? Well, you can start to teach them certain things. Toddlers always want to run you mad anyways, by the ways. I give Emeka kudos, because me, when I had toddlers, oh my God, I don't know how, let's not go into that. So do you understand where I'm going at Embassy? So you need to let them know their identity. And I tell Nigerians, right, it's not by sending them to Catholic school. It's not by sending them to whatever. You can't, how long will you shield them? And it's very important. Now, if these kids don't have this identity, it's going to be, I saw it happen in Nigeria. The girls were doing runs. The people who were smoking rubbish. Most of them had been shielded and shielded. So when they finally got this expose, and it's happening now, I see many Nigerian kids so shielded. Sometimes I want to cry. It's painful because I already see that this is the wide road, though. You are not on the narrow road. You think you're taking this to the narrow road. You're taking them to the wide road. Many of you can't even have conversations in school. Some of them are so timid. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So you must raise them, Busi, and then you must be involved. You can't say you finish raising them. The truth is that you will keep raising and raising and raising. You cannot say, because after all, my kids are good people. Who are the people that are rolling with? Quickly spot. What if somebody has started smoking in book and is carrying them? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And we don't shield our kids. We start to tell them things early on. Why should you not take drugs? Why is this that? Why? The other day, my kid, they went to a whatever downtown, and he came back on his own. He was like, oh my God, there's so many people wasted. And I don't think that's a good life. I think this is what you've been explaining to us in the past. I was not the one who showed him those people downtown. He just went on a school trip. I think they went to the legislative quarters. And myself and my husband were looking like, oh yeah, okay, that's true. We didn't even shout. We're like, oh yeah, why do you think this is tough? It was like, yeah, this is a bad situation. If they had a better way to manage their lives, I'm sure they won't be here, blah, blah, blah. Right? So they know their identity early. That was a 10-year-old boy. Now, I'm not here to blast my horns. Don't think we also have shortcomings. We have self-healing. I have things I'm working on. For example, I'm not the most patient person. My husband is more patient. I'm also learning to be more patient. Right? So I'm not self-righteous. Don't get me wrong. Right? I've learned to not be too, strong-handed, relax a bit. Everything's not wahala, up and down. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
No. There's no way Busi's question was not answered and over answered. Even my own question.
It's a very valuable point.
Please,